becomes more complex, and she gradually discovers that she hasn't been alone in her need for closure. Because whenever a human life is forcibly taken by bullet or by electric chair, the reckoning is long and difficult for all. So before I get into my take on the book, I'll give you a little history of the crime itself. Early on the morning of February 20th, 1976, a Florida highway patrolman and his friend, a visiting Canadian constable, approached a car park at a rest stop for a routine check. Jesse Tefera, Sonia Jacobs, their 2 children, and Walter Rhodes, a prison friend of Tefera's, were asleep in the car. Allegedly, the patrolman saw a gun on the floor of the car. He woke the occupants and had Rhodes and Tefera get out of the car. At some point after that, both the patrolman and the constable were shot. After fleeing the scene in the patrolman's car, then dumping the car, and kidnapping a man, stealing his car, the 3 were caught at a roadblock and arrested. Rhodes turned state evidence in exchange for a plea to a lesser charge. Tefera and Jacobs were tried and convicted. Most true crime books are told from a second-hand account. You do some investigating and you find out about the crime. When Ellen was a young reporter, she was sent to witness the execution of Jesse Tefera at a Florida state facility. It was a horrible experience. The electric chair, and that's how they executed people back in the day, malfunctioned, and his head actually caught fire.
Oh,
it was absolutely horrible. So, of course, this stuck with her for a very long time. And then years later, evidence started coming out that maybe Jessie was not necessarily the guilty party. So she turned in her reporter badge and became a private investigator. Not necessarily because of this case, but it really kind of cemented the fact that that's what she wanted to do with her life. And she was very good at it. She really wanted to bring light to this story and find out the absolute truth. Even though this is the story of 2 police officers being gunned down, we, the reader, really watch Ellen's growth as well. She's like a dog with a bone. She is not going to give up until she finds out the truth. She interviewed so many people for this book. She went here in the United States. She went to Sweden. She went to Ireland.
What was the Swedish and Irish connection?
The Sonia Jacobs, she was exonerated, and actually she even wrote a play called Exonerated about her experience with this. She moved to Ireland.
Oh, okay.
And how she got to Sweden was Sonia and Jesse's, one of his children, I think it was the 9-year-old, moved to Sweden to be with a girlfriend. She went to interview him as well. She was not going to give up until she finds the truth.
The kids were in the car?
The kids were in the car also.
Okay.
The one thing I really learned from reading this book, and we all kind of know this, and that's why I think the title of this book was so appropriate. Everyone has a different version of the truth.
Of course.
Everyone in their own mind really believe that that is the truth. It was very interesting. It was a good book on social issues like the death penalty, and also whether you believe that people can reform. Is this something that can happen for people? And there were some very interesting characters in this book, like some gangsters from the 1970s, and even Mickey Rourke's brother.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's like a friend of this Jesse. Apparently, Florida in the 70s was, a hotbed of sin and violence. And
not much better now.
I really enjoyed this book. I flew through it. It was the ending. It's not your typical ending where you're going to necessarily, it's going to be up to you. There's only 3 witnesses, well, 5 with the 2 children. They were pretty young. One of them's dead, and the other 2...
Well, his head caught on fire.
Yeah. Ellen did an amazing job of her investigative skills and her detective skills. There's not going to be a sequel. I don't think so. Maybe only if the real truth actually comes out.
Sounds like OJ.
Yeah. Highly recommended if you like a good true crime. Ellen McGarrahan is a writer and private investigator. Her first book, Two Truths and a Lie, was published by Random House in February 2021. She earned a bachelor's degree in history from Yale University and worked for 10 years as an investigative reporter and staff writer at newspapers including the Village Voice, the Miami Herald, and the San Francisco Weekly. She also has worked as a tile setter, has been a mystery book reviewer for San Francisco Chronicle. In 1996, she began work as a private detective at a prominent San Francisco agency. In 2000, she co-founded a general private practice investigative agency serving law firms and public agencies, and in 2009 founded Mcgarrigan Investigations, which assists law practices and businesses preparing for complex civil litigation. Her website is ellenmcgarrahan.com.
Very good. My second book is another friend of the show. We had him on. It's funny because Donis Casey was episode 101. This one was 102.
Are we going to do them all in order?
Yes. This book is called A Stranger at the Door by Jason Pinter. It is number 2 in the Rachel Marin mystery series. It was released by Thomas and Mercer on January 12th. We interviewed Jason about his first book, which was called Hideaway. In that book, Rachel Marin is the mother of 2 children, and her husband is violently murdered. It was the story of how she dealt with his murder and brought the murderer to task. Well, this book is a few years later. She's actively dating Detective Serrano, who helped in the original book. Her 2 children, 7-year-old Megan, is the star of this book. She wants to be a writer. She writes her own version of everything. She has her own little detective. She just writes copious volumes on this book. She's very talented at it. Well, Eric is now 14. That's her older son. And he is doing the 14-year-old. I remember those days. Won't talk to anybody, sulky, goes to his room, doesn't have anything to do with anybody unless he absolutely has to. Megan doesn't like that. She's trying to figure out what's wrong. He's even worse than your normal teenager. In her mind, she thinks he is. Very shortly after the start of the book, Eric's social studies teacher at school is killed in a house fire. Megan discovers a note from him the day before he died. He asked her to come and see him because there's something going on with teenage boys being involved with something they shouldn't be. That's all he said. And so she feels like she has to investigate this murder. The way the teacher was murdered was one of the most horrific. It's even worse than what Stephen King would come up with. It was just terrible. Rachel now works as a consultant to the police department. She helps them with their investigation because she's so good at it. When she gets involved with this case, of course, that's going to start some friction between her and Detective Serrano. All of a sudden, she gets a visit from, do you remember Evie from the first book?
Yes, yes.
Evie is Rachel's frenemy. She helped her. They work together, but they hate each other. And all of a sudden, Evie's back, and Rachel wants to know why. Rachel's son is invited by a classmate to come and meet this man who's going to give them a lot of money and help give them status. The kid has a Rolex watch. He's got money to burn. Eric sneaks out of the house, puts teddy bears under the blankets, and he sneaks out of the house. He doesn't realize, and if you knew the first book, Rachel has a command center. So she's sitting there, she's watching him. She's got everything wired in this house. And she's watching him climb out the window. Guess what she does?
Follows him.
She follows him. This story, it was about murder, mother's love. She was a mother bear going to protect her young and keep him out of trouble. It was a very, very well done book. I couldn't put it down. Rachel was so good in that first book. I loved her, and she's just as kick-ass in this book as she was in the first. She is not going to let anybody harm her kids. She's going to find out the truth. Nothing's going to stop her. It was enough time between the last book that Rachel can kind of relax. She's moving on with her life. Jason Pinter does such a good job of blending that story and this story. You know what happened in the last one. You know what's happening in this one.
So it could be a standalone.
Right. Well, it could be, yes. But the one thing some authors do is they keep repeating the same pattern over and over and over again. Jason Pinter does not. Rachel has a whole new ball game in this book. It is very well done. Jason is the internationally best-selling author of Hideaway, which was the first. He also writes the Henry Parker thriller series, as well as standalone thrillers called The Castle, and then he has 2 children's books. He's the founder and publisher of Polis Books and has been named one of Publisher Weekly's inaugural Star Watch honorees, which recognizes young publishing professionals who have distinguished themselves as future leaders of the industry. He lives in Hoboken, New Jersey with his wife and their 2 daughters, and you can find him at jasonpinter.com.
That was a full episode of books to keep you busy for a while. We only reserve books for these episodes for ones that we really, really enjoy. And we absolutely love revisiting with some of the friends from the show.
Definitely. Especially when they do such a wonderful job with the first book. Trivia. Last week's question was, who was the founder of the Wish You Well Foundation, which supports family literacy? A. John Le Carre, B. John Grisham, C. Thomas Harris, or D. David Baldacci? The answer is D. David Baldacci. He founded the Wish You Well Foundation, supporting adult and family literacy in the United States by fostering new and promoting existing adult literacy and educational programs. This week's question is, which famous mystery author is also a professor of medical law? A. Alexander McCall Smith, B. Lee Child, C. John Grisham, or D. Douglas Preston? Good luck. And so, be sure and visit our website at Dark Stormy BC. You can listen to 164 episodes. You can sign up for our newsletter, where you'll find more book recommendations.
And here's a little tip. First of all, we have a Patreon button right on our page that you can support the show. And if you don't want a monthly commitment, we also have this little button called a PayPal donation button. And we've had a few takers of this, and they just wanted to support us. So if you'd like to join that group, we will give you a shout out on the show. We will be eternally grateful.
Any donations of any size is welcomed and needed. With that, we will close another episode. We hope you'll join us next week. And remember,
life would be boring without a little mystery. Bye.